Much of the preparation that we're seeing right now is for the short term versus the long term? For example, outdoor lunches, so on and so forth. Are you sort of planning that, hey, look, when we get to flu season, we may have to shut down at that point in time, so let's get as much school in before we hit, I don't know, November, and maximize what we can right now before flu season? Is that part of the discussion at all?
It's not so much that, although we are thinking a lot about flu season, and in fact, next week, we're going to have some announcements around our plans for increasing flu immunizations. We really need everybody to get a flu shot this year. In any event, so yes, we're thinking about that. What we are planning for is now, for example, with the great weather, an easy way to have proper air circulation is windows. That's harder to do in the middle of the winter. So many districts now are placing orders for air filtration equipment to have it ready for when the winter comes. So we are doing a lot of that thinking. You know, it's great to have lunch outside now. It's harder to do that in December. So they are thinking of purchasing or renting trailers or trucks, et cetera, for when you can't use outside.
And who's paying for those renovations? Is that CARES Act money?
Yes, that's exactly what the districts are submitting. That's the $50 million that they're eligible for. So they'll, if they go purchase an air filtration, they'll submit their bills and we reimburse them for that.
Governor, as you highlight the work that I assume you think is good work being done by some of these districts with new protocols and with lunch and recess and buses, and you've criticized others, particularly Warwick, but they're all making their own decisions, and you said at this point you're not going to overrule them. Do you think this has kind of created a contentious and confusing atmosphere, kind of where some districts you're pointing out are doing the right thing and some are doing it wrong, when in the end it's up to them?
Well, I would say the overall atmosphere in the world right now is difficult, and that is no different than what we have here. I don't actually have the authority to overrule, as you say, what a school district or a school committee is, how they vote. If I did, I might, but we don't. So what we are doing is doing everything we know how to do to enable them to reopen. And, you know, that's kind of how we see it. So like the Department of Health, we're doing our job to tell them, do we think it's safe to reopen based upon their municipality? And what does it have to look like? And we're trying to help enable that. Having said that, parents do have certain rights, particularly parents whose students have special learning needs and they have contracts with, with schools, individual learning plans. And as a parent, I know I would fight for my kids, and I expect many of those parents will be fighting for their kids.
And I know you've kind of talked about this before, but we're still getting questions. A lot of people are like, the social gathering limit is still 15 people. You're putting teachers and kids at risk by sending, even if you social distance them, there's still going to be hundreds of kids in some of these schools. What's your response to that? And again, the continued concern from teachers especially.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because it might be the most common question we're getting at the moment, and I would like the doctor to answer that from a health perspective. My answer to that is that the Department of Health studied this extensively, and I'm following their guidance, so why don't you hear from him?
So, I think where there's been some confusion is I'm having a social gathering, a backyard barbecue. I'm having a party, I can have 15 people, why only 15? But at school, it's a stable group up to 30, a stable pod up to 30. So when we say stable pod, we're really talking about a group, but it's the same group every day throughout a school year. So everybody gets to know each other. They actually form a relationship with each other. They establish trust, they care about each other, and there's someone to actually enforce rules, a teacher, and maybe an assistant teacher. So it's a consistent group, it's a stable group. I think of it a little bit like a baseball team. They may come from different areas, but they're gonna be together every day, and the manager and coach will keep them well aligned, but it can be a larger group in that regard because we know what they're doing, they have assigned seats, we can track their movement, we can do contact tracing really easily, We can really keep track of the group. It's easier to keep track of the group, so the group can go up to 30. It doesn't have to be 30, so your classroom doesn't have to be up to 30. For a social gathering, a party, you might have 15 people. You may not know them well. They may not wear their masks. They may not social distance. We've seen a fair amount of that not happening, is people not wearing masks and social distancing at parties. We've actually seen more outbreaks from backyard barbecues than we ever expected, and that's what really got us in trouble in many ways over 4th of July weekend. And I worry about that for Labor Day weekend, just so you know. Just in case you're curious, the McDonald family is not gathering as our clan like we normally do. We're just keeping in our own little groups because we just feel it's safer. So with social gatherings, it's not controlled. There's no enforcer. It's a whole different mindset, and that's where we've seen outbreaks. So to me, they're qualitatively different, and I hope that answers the question for folks. Thank you.
Doctor, while you're at the podium, you cited the positivity rate of 0.7%. So that's based on the total test count, ignoring people who were tested for the first time. And going by the other measure, or the other condition, the positivity rate is closer to 2.2%. And do you feel that that's somewhat confusing? I don't want to say misleading, certainly, but confusing to cite those numbers in tandem or in opposition or separately? And separately on that point, later to the governor, should we choose to answer, have we gotten anywhere with Massachusetts changing their quarantine rules because Rhode Island has not exceeded their positivity threshold in weeks, yet we're still subject to quarantine out of state?
Yeah, so thanks for your question, and I do think it's confusing for people. Let me try to explain it the way I think about it. So 0.7% to me is a genuine statistic that we're reporting. And one of the things I just want you to think about is when you have a test, that just tells me at that moment in time, you don't have the virus on you. That's what it tells me. Why that's important is you might have been tested for X reason 3 weeks ago and you were negative, but I still need to test you now because you had a new reason to be tested. Whether it's because you're coming to college or whether it's because you were a close contact of someone, there's just a different reason. So our numbers are astonishingly low, though, and I think that's just an important point. When we look at our incidence, what I mean by incidence is the number of cases per week and per day compared to other states, we're still doing way better than the vast majority of states in the country. And when you look at where the country is going with COVID, we're heading in the right direction here. And I'm going to say something I haven't said in the last 187 days. So I'm about to say something I haven't said in a long time. So in over 6 months, I've used this sentence. I am optimistic. And I know that sounds simple, but my friends, I have lived with this pandemic every day for the last 187 days like you have no idea. I'm optimistic about what I'm seeing right now because the fact, the governor highlighted this earlier, when the numbers went up a couple weeks ago, I was nervous and I was like, oh my gosh, we're doing all this testing, it's going to be a hot mess on our hands. But remember I said earlier, there isn't a cure right now, but here's our current cure. We have case finding, case investigation, contact tracing. This is really critical, and that only comes when you test people. So we're always one of the top 3 states that test people, and that makes me optimistic, and we're persevering. I can't believe we did 8,500 tests yesterday. I remember being at a previous press conference when someone said, how do you possibly think you could do 1,000 tests a day? And I said, well, we think we're going to make it happen. We're pretty confident. And now we're blowing that out of the water. It really highlights to me a lot of what Rhode Island's done during the pandemic. Every time I just see the impossible in front of me, it not only becomes possible, it actually happens. I'm continually pleasantly surprised by how my partners throughout the state help us move this thing. So, to your question, I understand there's confusion, but I really think the 0.7% is a legitimate number and the number that makes the most sense to me. You had another question for the governor. Let me step aside, let her address that. Thank you.
So we've been working on this harder than ever because, look, Rhode Island tests twice as much as Massachusetts. We are testing twice as much as Massachusetts on a per capita basis. And the test that we're failing on the Massachusetts travel test is the number of cases per week. Now, we're finding more cases per week because we're testing twice as much. And it's not a good strategy for us to test less or test less strategically in order to find fewer cases in order to get off the Massachusetts list. And our percent positive at 0.7% is far below the, percent positive that they and the CDC recommend. So we have not yet prevailed upon the Commonwealth to change their rules, but we're working on it, because my argument to them is, we're your neighbor, we're a bordering state, we have a lot of interstate commerce, we have a lot of people who cross, I don't know what that was, a lot of people who cross boundaries, and I think it's different. So anyway, I think Baker's doing a great job, his team's doing a great job, they have an open ear to us. I'm on it, I'm pushing, I'm trying, but those are the facts.
When were you last able to talk to Governor Baker of Massachusetts about this? Because to be candid with you, Governor Baker's office won't even respond to my telephone messages and emails.
That I'm not going to get in the middle of, but we daily, constantly.
Commissioner, for parents who their children have to do distance learning, I'm hearing like Coventry, Warwick, is there some mechanism where at least the child could meet the teacher? Could you talk about the importance of, in the beginning of a new school year, for the teacher to meet their new students? Because when we went in the pandemic, that was March, it was the end, and they had known them. These are brand new for children to meet these teachers.
Yeah, so that's actually extremely important. And one of the things that we have been telling districts is exactly that. That's why transition grades were so important for us as we were moving forward in all the conversations, because it is going to be a new environment, new teachers. I think we had whatever success we had, or if we could call it that at that time, was because they knew the teachers, exactly what you're saying. So should teachers be communicating beforehand? Absolutely. Should be communicating with the parents too, so that there's some sense of ownership and being part of a class, because it is going to be different. So yes.
Quick follow-up. Now, yesterday we all learned about a horrific crime that happened in Providence with a 16-year-old girl attacked by 8 men. I've been told that it was a teacher that was supportive to that child to come forth and cooperate. And law enforcement told me many times it's teachers that see these children. Are you okay? What happened? You're falling behind. It just seems cruel that these children in certain communities will not have access to the teachers that play a big role in that.
So that's why we've been so adamant about getting kids back to school, right? It's not just the academic, but it's also the social emotional. This is the place that many kids get support that they may or may not get at home. So there are many aspects to an education. So that's why we've been really strong about this, it's really important for kids to have that. And they're right. Teachers play a big role.
Tanya Signori from the Rhode Island Echo. To the doctor, when do you think we'll be able to see blood tests that will be able to tell if someone's currently COVID-19 positive? I'm not speaking of the antibody tests, but I'm also speaking because there are people without school-age children that are watching today. So when do you think we'll be able to have blood tests, blood work, routine blood work that will show for COVID? And the second part would be, in an effort to promote more and more testing, which is the goal, anytime anyone gets routine blood work, for them to have an access to a swab. Okay, would you like an optional, would you like to get tested today for COVID? A lot of people get routine blood work on a yearly or twice a year basis, 4 times a year, and they always have the option to get tested for COVID as a way to promote more testing. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so Tanya, what I see in the testing marketplace is more antigen testing, which is not blood testing as much as nasal swab testing. And what I see is more of these same-day rapid tests. So what I mean is the Sophia Quidel test, the BD Veritor test, and the Abbott Binax test was just announced. And part of what I think is interesting about the Abbott Binax test, it's the size of a credit card. There's no machine involved. You take someone's mucus, and you can get an answer within 15 minutes. I see that really taking over the outpatient marketplace, and I'm optimistic about that because one of the things we really need the pandemic to do is eventually return to the usual practice of medicine, where you can go to your doctor's office like you normally would, get a test, because like we go to the doctor for strep throat, we get a rapid strep, it's done, we get that. I'm old enough to know when that wasn't even possible, by the way. Because back when I started doing this, a rapid strep test didn't exist. I am that old, thank you very much. To your other question about blood tests, though, for antibodies. So that's interesting. You know, one of the things we're looking at right now is antibody testing. In other words, did you had COVID, and then do you have something that's positive, what's called IgG? Immunoglobulin G is a little bit like in your computer, your hard drive, your long-term memory. And if you're IgG positive, what that implies is that your body has seen the infection and knows it's there. So if you are re-exposed, it's a little bit like having a suit of armor on. Your immune system takes care of it for you. So that testing is happening now. I think the question we're seeing is how to best utilize it, and does it really mean you have long-term immunity? There's studies going on. We are actually just finishing up with the CDC our own study on that. We're one of the 3 entities that did that. New York City, Detroit, and Rhode Island participated in that. Interestingly, I actually did it myself. I had the blood test done. I was negative. And that was exciting to me because it meant that my own personal infection prevention plan had been working. But what I also realized was, in order for me to be successful and not acquire COVID, the people around me all had to be part of my personal infection prevention plan. They were 6 feet away from me. They're wearing masks. So I didn't like get tennis-elbow patting myself on the back, but I was actually extensively gracious and really thankful to the people around me because they didn't get me sick. And I'm a doctor. I still see patients. So that's pretty cool to me, you know what I mean? But I think you're going to see more of this serology testing, which is what you asked about, becoming more commonplace. Abbott has a nice test, and I think that's got the EUA from the FDA. I think it's commercially interesting. I think you're going to see people utilizing it. I think one of the things we don't know yet, though, is does it mean you have long-term immunity? You know, one of the unanswered questions for now, it's interesting. There are some people who had COVID. They were positive. We know that, but their IgG is negative. So does that mean they had waning immunity, or does it mean that they didn't have it enough where their immune system actually got a big enough signal? So this is something that still needs to be answered. And there might be some people who had such a minor infection or asymptomatic that they were identified, but they don't have long-term immunity. This is part of why when I hear people talking about herd immunity, they're getting way ahead of themselves. And we let the science be the science and let us understand that question more thoroughly. Thank you.
On the flip side, on the flip side of what I asked before about this for the governor and Dr. McDonald, I guess. On the flip side of what I asked before about the stable, you know, the kids in school versus the social gatherings. People are going to hear what the doctor just said, where the case numbers are astonishingly low. Things have kind of dipped back down from the spike about a month and a half ago. Why not ease back up on some of the other restrictions like social gatherings that you kind of pulled back on during that spike? I know you extended the orders to the month, but some people are going to hear this and be like, why are the other things still so strict when you're trying to get kids back in school and the case numbers are low again?
This, you know, I mean, you asked the million-dollar question, because if we relax things, then we'll be in trouble again. I mean,
how good is good enough at this point? The cases are very low.
Yeah, so again, great question. I mean, this is what we do all day. This is the balance. Everything we do is a judgment call and trying to strike a balance. So 4th of July, and the week that followed 4th of July, we got a little bit lax, you know, and I let the social gathering go up to 25, et cetera, and we started to feel uncomfortable. You just saw the cases going up, hospitalizations going up. We were on a trend where we would have overwhelmed our hospital system, which is why we had to cut back. So right now, if you look at our unemployment rate, how much our economy has recovered compared to where we were a year ago, balanced against our hospitalizations, we found a good balance. So I'm trying to keep it stable with that balance of getting as many people back to work as possible. You know, like in California and New York, you still can't get your hair cut inside, you can't go to dinner inside, we're allowing as much as we think we can allow to enable commerce, but we're in a comfortable place with it's all the metrics that I won't bore you with now, but that I'm up here all the time saying, you know, an infection rate of around 1, hospitalization steady. That's why we have had these metrics that we've been very transparent about. We could disagree about them, but they're working for us.
Governor, do you genuinely believe that sometime during your term, you're going to walk out on this stage or any other forum and say, look, I know there's no phase 4, but we've done it, we're fully reopened, I know there'll be adjustments, the new normal, et cetera, but do you believe that that is, based on what you know internally that we're heading in a direction where that is possible?
Yes, absolutely. You know, I have 2 years left, so that's why I'm so confident. If my term ended this end of this year, I might not be so confident, but I believe there will be a vaccine. Don't ask me when, I don't know when, but there, you know, many companies are streaming forward with great progress. I think, look, based on everything I know now, I would say even by this time next year, we have a chance of being, to use your word, back to normal. I don't know. I certainly hope so. And that's what I think.
Yeah, Governor, unrelated to COVID, there's effectively about a week left in the exclusivity deal with Fortuitous Partners and the state of Rhode Island relative to the Tidewater Landing deal. Is there an announcement on that imminent? And given the, if you will, failure of professional sports to operate outside of what they call now the bubble, a in-person sports attendance experience, is it possible for it to go forward?
Yeah, I need to get back to you on that. It's interesting you asked because I checked in on this just the other day. It's our expectation that it is going to go forward, but I will have the Commerce Secretary call you today and get you the exact details on the exclusivity agreement. But anyway, yes, as far as I know, it is going to go forward.